All right. Looks like it's about 8 o'clock. And we're up and running. Looks like I've got some sound, hopefully. And we've got some... Oh, yeah, good. We're getting some people in there. Good evening, Vincent. Hopefully you can see and hear me. Once again, just give it a few seconds here before we get started. I know some people who watch this afterwards on YouTube that are rather disturbed that, we don't get jumping right into it. It's not some kind of a overly polished and heavily edited kind of a live stream. So, all right, Dave Redland's here. Fantastic. Here we go. Sound and video is good. Thanks, Vincent. Looks like we're getting a little crowd. Troy's here. Sound and video great. James from Williamsburg, awesome. John's here. Skip is here. Well, I can tell you, Troy, the buying experience was tremendous. It was probably the best vehicle buying experience I ever had. So, 2 thumbs up. It was awesome. Leo's here. Miter, I barely knew her. Perfect. Charles is here, and Barry's here. Awesome. We're rolling along. We've got a pretty good crowd to get started. Yeah, definitely. So, without further ado, welcome to No BS Woodworking Tuesday Tips. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through a bunch of the stuff that I do regarding miters and what I've seen from teaching all these years and writing for magazines and things like that, and being out on the show circuit with the woodworking shows. John, just to answer your question real quick before I jump into that, I do remember you. I didn't have time to address it last week. Everything was sort of moving along, so I do remember you. So, Douglas is here. All right. So, with all the woodworkers that I've met over the years, miters seem to be one of those simple joints that just really isn't all that simple. So, hopefully, a lot of people have trouble with it. They suffer through not being able to get good tight miters, and then they don't really know what to do, so they break out the putty or whatever, and off we go. So what I did here in preparation for this was I made a little box. Before we get into that, I don't really want you guys to pay attention to the joinery on this thing. It's not about the box. And my moldings are rather flat and square because it's going to be really easy for me to mark things and show you. Once you get into molded stuff, you might have to make some modifications to the methodology. Well, to the marking aspect of it, the methodology is going to be the same. Oh, Fred's here. Awesome. Martin from Florida, doing good. Awesome. We're doing quite well. So we've got a good crowd. We're ready to get started on miters. Before I do want to make one not so good announcement. A lot of you guys who have known me over the years know that Glenn Huey and I have been friends a long time, and we worked together at Pop Wood because because of Glenn, I never even started writing for Popwood. It would have even started writing for them if it wasn't for Glenn. And he was one of the two guys who got me started teaching, which led to me meeting Tommy Mack and learning how to do a little bit of video and then diving deep into that rabbit hole. Last Friday, very unexpectedly, Glenn passed away. So I don't know how much the woodworking world out there has gotten wind of this yet, but it's been a sad few days for me as a friend and as a woodworker. Glenn had a huge influence on a lot of the woodworkers that I've met throughout the years, me included. Just a tremendously nice guy, super good woodworker, and an excellent communicator, unlike me. I don't know what else to say. I just wanted the woodworking world, that at least the handful that sort of show up here, most of you guys I know probably either knew Glenn personally, or you knew him through his books or his magazine articles, or the videos that we did either for for Popwood, or when we started 360 Woodworking, all of those things. So I just thought I would throw that out there and say, rest in peace, my friend. Sad days. But all that said, Bob Wilkinson. Oh, hey, Bob. Yeah. Thank you, guys. That's awesome. After you said your hammer saw was the best, I saw a guy in Mass selling one for $2,000 as a North. Well, there you go. Yeah, it's yeah. I don't know what to say, and I want to get through this, so I'm not gonna go a whole lot more on that. So, without further ado, again, let's jump right into miters. So, like I said, I made a little box here. Nothing special on the joinery. One of the things that I did do, it's all butt joints here, is I made one end about a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch smaller than the other, so that things were not perfectly square. I mean, when I assembled it, I measured diagonally, and because that's what woodworkers are taught to do, and the measurements diagonally are dead on. But I can tell you the corners are not square, because one end of this thing is about 10 1/8 and the other one's about 10. So I cut it that way specifically. So if you guys aren't sure, a parallelogram, where two sides are parallel and the other two are not, you can measure diagonally and come up with the same, a trapezoid. You can come up with the same diagonal measurements, but your corners don't necessarily have to be at 90. It's all based on dimensions. All right. Yeah, I can't help you there, Troy. He said, he does that all the time, but not by design. This was done specifically. I had the stop set on the slider when I was cutting everything I made the long sides 12 inches and the short sides 10. And when I cut the second piece, I slid it up against the stop, and then bumped it over about 1/8 of an inch and cut it off again, because I did not want them to be perfect. Because seldom are they. So I'm going to switch cameras here real quick, and we're going to get started with, if I can remember which one is which. Yeah, that's it. So like I said, I've got just some straight material here for moldings. And if you look, I've already cut those two. I have my saw set up over here. We'll get to that here in a minute. At 45 degrees. And if I just butt this stuff together right at the corner where it's supposed to go, hopefully you guys can see this on camera, but when I pull it tight to the case, you should be able to see that at the toe of the miter, it's nice and tight. But back here at the heel, I've got a space. So I've got a couple of different options here on how to fix that. I can either bisect the angle properly. So if I throw this here and I pull those tight to the case, and all I want to do is bisect this angle. I don't really know or care what the degree angle is. All I really need to do is mark my inside and outside surfaces. It'll lean all the way over this thing because I should have gone around to the other side of the bench. Okay, so you guys should be able to see that I've got two little blue marks on there. I'm doing this in blue simply because it shows up fairly well against the light colored pine scraps that I have as my molding. So if I connect those 2 points, that's my angle. Okay, and if I come over to the other piece, you can see I've got a little tick mark on that side, and I have a little tick mark on this side, and they are the inside and outside edges of the other piece. So if I draw that, and then I set a bevel to that angle, if I've done this properly, they should be exactly the same. So if I bring that around, line it right up there, and tighten up my bevel, you can see I'm set slightly off of my line, but there we go. So hopefully you can see the blue line lines up with my edge of my bevel. And if I take it onto this piece, I am in the exact same position. So I know that is my bisected angle. So if I were to set my miter saw to this angle, I'm going to cut those two and they're going to be they should perfectly line up. But let's say I bisect it like that, and I decide I cut them, and when I put them together, I still end up either with the toe open or the heel open. You guys do know that the toe of the miter is the acute angle, and the heel is the obtuse angle, right? So let's say I still end up with that tiny little bit of gap on the inside there. So I'm going to switch my camera again. I'm going to go over to the saw this time, if I can remember which one it is. Wow, shocking. I got it on the first shot there. So I have my saw set up at 45 degrees. And typically when I do moldings, and it doesn't matter what the shape of the molding is, I will set it 45 degrees to the right, and that's where I keep it. I don't tend to bisect the angles all that much and then set this at some weird angle because there's a detent here for 45. And if I were to set my bevel, which I had left on the opposite end of my bench, And then I work my way all the way back over here. If I bring it in here tight, you're going to see I've got about not quite 1/8 of an inch of space at the back of my blade here. So, I mean, it's not, that angle's more off than you think, but it's not so much that on a small piece of molding, it's going to be hard to set up on the saw because it's going to want to drop back into the detent all the time. So to me, I've always found it easier just to set this at 45, no matter what the case is. And then I cut my first piece on this angle, which you can see I've got right at 45. Then I bring it over and I'll cut the other piece at 45. And now what we're going to do is start to mate one to the other. Now I'm going to trim only one piece. So I'm going to leave the other one cut at 45. And because I was touching at the toe and I was open at the heel, what that means is I need to pitch my board a little bit, or I have to change the angle, but I don't want to change the angle of my saw. I've got it set at 45, leave it there, right? So if that means, and if I slow down, take a breath, start over. All right. So what that means is if I want to trim a little off of that toe because I have a slight gap at the back like that when I put the two miters together, you can see what it means is I need to pitch the farther end away from the blade out from my fence. So the way that I do that is I just use a little sandpaper. You can use any shim you like. I believe on the woodworking show circuit, Ron Herman was showing people how to use shooting boards, and he called it the nickel method. So he was using a nickel because it's uniform and measurable. So if I have a gap at the heel and I want to cut more off the toe, hopefully no, is it on? No, awesome. I'm not on camera with my wedge. Is it on there now? Not quite. I thought I had this dialed in, and now I can't see. Live woodworking, folks, not edited, for your viewing pleasure. There we go. Now you can see my piece of sandpaper off to the left here. And what it's doing is, and I'm putting my pressure between the sandpaper and the blade, right? And what that's doing is it's pushing this out so that when I take a cut here, I'm going to take more off the toe. But what you can see, hopefully still on camera, is I have a slight gap there, but it's not as much as we had on the actual miters. So in order to increase this angle, what I'm going to do is move my wedge closer to the blade. And now I've doubled the amount of space that I have there. So I'm butting it straight up against the body of the blade. Still, my pressure is between the wedge and my blade, and that's what gives me that that's what gave me that step away from the fence there. So if conversely I was hitting at the heel and my toe was open, I would reverse the position of my wedge and my pressure. So if I have to take more off the heel, the wedge goes between my pressure point and the miter. If I have to take more off the toe, my pressure goes between the wedge and the miter saw. Okay, I'm going to go back over, switch cameras, and we'll see whether or not I got close. I think it was, nope, that's my wide shot. I knew it was that top one. All right, there we go. So I've left this one right in place. So if I bring this one in, ooh, so close. Yeah, I mean, it's probably just a few thou open in that, still on the heel side. So I'm going to go back. I left my, sorry, too funny, guys. Normally what I do is I leave my sandpaper, and I don't use this is a quarter sheet. Normally I just tear off thin strips of this, and I can leave them right where I want it, where I made the cut. So I was about there. So if I slide a little farther, bring this back again, and I'm going to do that creep up cut. So I'm going against the body of the blade. So when I make the cut, really it's just whatever the carbide tips are sticking out from the body. It's still tight up against. So I'm going to move my wedge over a little more. There we go. That's probably going to be too much, but good for our demo, right? So I'm taking off the toe, so my pressure goes between the wedge and the blade. Tight up against the body. Make one cut. You know, I could have done this as a split screen, so I wouldn't have to keep swapping back and forth. Now, couldn't I? If I could figure out how to do that in this program, it would be, that's my wide shot again. Get it right, dummy. You know, before this is over, I'll figure it out. Probably right before we go. Ooh, look at that. So I crept up on it pretty quickly. Took 2 cuts and we got there. So realistically, I'm tight against my case. Theoretically, that angle is not bisected. And if this was a really huge molding, you would see a disparity between this plane and this plane. One of those would be sticking out a little bit. That's going to be a topic for another episode here of how I make those things sort of flush up there. Right now, the idea is you can see how I can get started wrapping this box. So I want to try and rotate on, and we're going to go hit another corner here. Yeah, Troy's got it right. Can you discuss the cut on the second side? And you need to keep the total length, right? And Michael says he assumes this works for table saw miter. Yes, it works for miter gauges, table saw sleds. It works on my slider. You can do the same thing. Again, if I've got the miter gauge or miter sled or whatever set up, and I need to take more off the heel, then I'm going to pitch that thing away from my fence. Again, it might be reverse on the sled or the miter gauge. You just have to kind of see how you're cutting. You know, if I put the wedge out, so if this was instead of the edge of my box here, let's say this is the fence on my sled, or I have my miter gauge tilted at 45, and I want to take more off the toe. I put my wedge in here, and all my pressure goes between the wedge and the fence and the cut, which is exactly the same as what we did on the miter saw. Okay, so once I get this located in the position here, and I've got a nice tight miter, and we are going to try and work our way around pretty quickly around the box. Clearly, I don't need to go through the demo on every single. Right, Cryptic Woodworker keeps a deck of playing cards handy. That works fine too. You guys use whatever you like as your shims. I'm trying to see how I would. let's see if I can do a split screen. Extra camera. There we go. That's not the one I want. Let's see if that's the one. Nope. Try it again. That's the one. Do not mirror the camera. Thank you very much. Let's see. Somehow that didn't change what I wanted. Okay. Too bad. We're just going to go back to the normal. And I'm going to switch back. We're just going to have to jump back and forth. I'm still trying to figure this camera out. Oh, no, I want you guys to see me mark this thing. Sorry, guys. Okay, so you've seen the first one there. I'm going to get rid of this nonsense out of the way. So the object here is, once I have this lined up, now I can come down to this other end, holding that tight into position, mark this side. And I know that my miter goes out in that direction, right? I want it to angle away. Unfortunately, because I have my miter saw set up to the right, what that means is I have to put it on the underside here. And all I do is transfer the tick mark, which is the edge of my box, and then I put a slash showing me which direction to cut this thing. Now I'll switch cameras. I'm gonna have to play with it a little more so I can see the program to see how I can get a split screen here. I'm going to remove that sandpaper because right now all I'm trying to do is cut my first 45-degree miter. So I'll line this up. Would have been easier had I marked it at a 45 instead of just a random slash. So we'll do this real quick. And now it becomes tremendously easy to line up. And if I'm going to be honest, I'm going to cut it a little fat of my line. So if I come back over, thanks, Mike. Flying by the seat of my pants, just like I do in real life. So that's all I know. So the only thing I'm going to take a look at here is, do I see a flat in this corner? And if I rotate it around, you're going to see it's fairly close. There's maybe a 64th of an inch hanging out there beyond the heel that is sticking out just beyond the plane of my box. So I'm going to call that good enough. I'm going to chop one more 45-degree angle here, and we're going to try and come across that end. Oh, that wasn't good. All right. So with everything, I've got the miter at the other end that we've already fitted, pulled up tight. We mark that and cut it off. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but if I look at my blue line there, there's just a tiny little bit of daylight between it and the edge of my board. Get rid of that dust. Bring this in, and perfect. It's not perfect. I'm touching on the toe again. So at this point, I'm cutting that second one. And what I'm going to do is take some off of this toe. Right? Again, I have that same problem. So clearly on my trapezoid, this is the base. So that they're angling. No, this is the, yes, they're angling out the top, whatever. You guys will figure it out. I'm confusing myself. So I want to take some off of that toe. And then we're going to have a little discussion about this stuff. I do want to try and hit the other two corners here. So I already know I've got to be somewhere around here with my sandpaper, because that's where I was on the last one, and I had about that same gap. So again, if I'm taking off the toe and leaving the heel where it is, I'm pushing up, just snugging it up to the body of my saw blade. I raise it up, push tight against the fence. Leave my wedge right where it fell. Switch the camera. So again, opposite corner was already fit. Bring this one in. And now I've got a nice tight fit there. Okay. If I had to, I could cut it again. If you guys look at what I've got here, I've got this piece of molding, and yes, it's square, but it's still a molding, running wild off the end of my box here. And this is gonna eventually create the problem. So again, holding that miter over there tight that we just fit, I'm gonna mark that corner. I'm gonna flip it over, transfer that tick mark up onto this face of my molding. Take my miter square. I'm going to swap cameras, make a cut. So now I'm going to leave this one at the 45. So again, I'm going to move my wedge, lay it right up against. You can see my line and a little bit of daylight beyond. I've cut my miter a little fat of my line. Switch cameras. The key to all of this is I am keeping one. I mean, I know I'm fairly close to square. I mean, if I've got something that's a half an inch, whoops, that's upside down. You know, if my box is made intentionally much smaller along one side than the other, you know, for whatever reason, obviously I am going to have to bisect those angles the way that I started. So again, I'm seeing maybe a 1/64 of an inch of projection of this surface, and the heel point is slightly protruding beyond the plane of my box. So I can just barely catch my pencil on it. Since I don't want to fit that one just yet, because I want to mark this, that's before I throw that on the floor. I'm going to mark that one. And because that's on top, I can now just scribe my 45. I'm just going to make the cut. You guys will have to look at some dead air for 2 seconds. It's kind of silly to keep going back and forth when all I'm doing is making the same cut over and over. Okay. So if I assemble my 3 pieces again, bring everything in nice and tight where it was before. Now you can see again, maybe I'm protruding here on that inside surface about a 64th beyond this. I'm going to leave that there because if worst comes to worst, when I fit my final side here, which is what I was trying to get to, when I fit that, if I end up a tiny bit too long, I can go back and once I get the miters tuned to complement these 45s or supplement, I'm trying to remember whether that's complementary or supplementary. Some mathematician will yell at me because I got it wrong. I'm going to widen up that camera just a touch. It was good for you guys to see the miters up close, but what's happening is I can't get this final piece in here. So I've got everything set to go for my 4th side. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my final stick over here, cut a quick 45 on it. I am going to remove one end. And what I'm going to do is fit that miter. Okay, so this is kind of what I was talking about before. If I zoom in more than a little and recenter here, you guys should be able to see that this plane is sticking out just slightly beyond this plane here. So this one's a little long. So what I need to do, and you can see I've got a slight gap in that heel again. So I need to cut this more, and that's going to exaggerate that a little bit. So here I'm tuning this very slowly because I left that side piece a 64th long, say. I could go over and I can trim this by butting it up against the body of the blade and taking one tiny little cut. So let's do that real fast. And then we'll recheck that. So no wedge. I want to keep, this is my base piece. I want to keep that 45. So very lightly against the body of the blade. And you can see I'm nice and tight. And I went, anytime now, thank you. I went right back up to my line. I just took my line off. I was just barely past my line before. So again, if I line that up on the, widen up. And that also means I can move a little forward so that you guys can see what's going on. So I've got this miter back here, everything pulled tight. Honestly, if I was actually attaching this to the box, this piece back here along this side, I would have glued and tacked into position. Because that way it's permanent. And now this one I could bring into a permanent position, make sure that I'm tight in my miter. And now when I cut that, start fitting that cross piece, what you're going to see is when I come in here, I'm no longer protruding way out on this tip, on the toe there, but I do still have just the tiniest little gap at the heel of my miter. So I'm going to shim that one quick shim. We'll talk about that, John. All right. So I need to take a tiny bit off of my toe. So I'm going to go way out there. Bring this in till it just barely touches. And now we'll check. Oh, switch cameras. Oh, no, I didn't switch. Sorry, guys. Can't see what you're talking about. Okay, now we're back. All right. So what I did was I had my wedge way far out. I thought I had switched the camera. Sorry, folks. And what I did was I butted against, just barely touching the body of the blade, made sure that I was pressed tight against the fence here, and then I took a cut. Okay? You heard it, didn't see it, wasn't all that exciting. So, and if you look at the position, when I was making the adjustments before, I had my wedge, my sandpaper, way in tight here because I was trying to take a lot more off. I had about half the gap on this in the heel area, so I moved that wedge way out so that I was taking it. It was cutting a much shallower angle. So just taking a tiny bit off of there. Switch the camera back because you aren't seeing what I'm doing. Okay, now I can bring that in, and I've got a good tight miter. So holding that into position, I am going to scribe this final side. And remember, this piece here is still just a tiny bit fat of my line, right? So I can mark this one, and because I'm going to have to flip this molding over, I'm going to mark it on that bottom side, take my miter square, drop it right into position, mark it, and again, I'm starting with a 45, so no wedge. Wait, did I change the camera? Yes. Thought I did. Thought I was mistaken, but I was wrong. Okay. And again, slightly fat of my line. If you see, you can see the blue line and then a tiny little bit of wood protruding beyond. So now, when I fit this final miter, on camera preferably, so again, you have to think in terms of this, the stick of molding that's on this backside. I would probably have that permanently attached. And to be honest with you, once I got this miter over here fit against that one, I would attach this piece now permanently to my box, because now I have a solid baseline here. I can butt this against that baseline. And now when I work on this corner, what you're seeing is, and here you can really see, because both pieces, this long front piece and this short end piece, are still extra long. And what you're seeing is you can see that the toe on this front piece is projecting, it's about a 1/16 beyond this plane. So that's what happens when things get too long. And you can see there's this funky little triangular gap right up against the case. But the miter's not too bad at two of them at 45. So I have one 90-degree angle on my whole box. So what that means is the first thing I can do is I'm going to go back over and just keep the 45, no shim. And what I'm going to do is skim this corner just a little bit to get closer to my line. I could do it on the end piece, and then we're going to, like I said, then we're going to jump into a discussion of all the questions you guys have that I'm ignoring successfully in the chat. So once again, I'm going to just lightly butt it up against the body. You got to make sure that the saw blade is all the way down, and butt it just lightly against the saw blade. I don't want to deflect the blade. I'm not pushing on it so hard that it bows the blade. I'm just tapping it, and you can you guys hear the teeth? Try that again since it just slid. All right, let's try it again. Back over here. So again, yes, I believe that's correct. One way or another, this is either going to be upside down or right side up. It's upside down. So we'll try that again. There we go. Those two fit just fine. And now when I bring this one in, that miter is good. This miter is good. Now I slid something. There we go. Oh, come on, silly. What are you doing here? This is why I attached those first two pieces, because something's still a little long. I'm going to throw a clamp on there real quick. I know you guys can't see it because I don't have the camera wide enough for that. You know what? We're going to go. I'm going to have to do it that way. Not with those clamps, though. It doesn't matter. Once again, just doesn't matter if everything's perfect here. We just have to. So if I permanently mount the first corner that I get done, now all I'm doing is fitting. All right, so this one, if I'm looking at that heel, it lines up perfectly with this plane of my box. So what I'm getting when I shove this in, the end piece in there, if I bring it down until the miters are tight on both ends here, and I will zoom back in. About there. And then if I slide this over just like that, hopefully you guys are seeing, once again, I've got a nice tight miter here. Take my word for it, the one on the other end is nice and tight, but I've got a uniform gap here on that inside. Oop. Get it right. I was holding that front piece in the wrong position because I'm like, wow, that was a huge gap. How did that get there? So clearly, like I said, if you guys are looking, you should be able to see my blue line here, plus a little bit of wood sticking out past it, a little bit of daylight there. So I really need to trim this one back now until it's right at the corner, and everything should just drop right into place. No shims necessary. So we're gonna pop to the other camera real quick. Blade all the way down, or if I'm doing this on the table saw, I'm moving in to the point where I'm not touching teeth. Just gently up against the body of the blade. I know, you want to see what's going to happen here, so I'm going to have to switch cameras once again. See, I have no director. I'm the director here. So again, I'm holding this piece in perfect position. And then if I pull that in, you can see I've got a good tight miter and I'm nice and tight along my box. Okay. So you guys like to creep up on things, or at least so that's what I hear all the time. So that's really all I've done here is I've taken my methodology and I've refined it to the point where I'm trimming the miters a 64th of an inch or so at a time, maybe a little less. The lighter I hold that mitered face up against the body of my blade, the shallower the cut I'm going to take. So if I just barely touch that surface, that plate, or if I leave just the slightest gap, a couple of thou, I can regulate the amount of material I'm taking off pretty regularly. Okay. The idea is fit one piece. So I started on this back face, this back long face, fit that miter end to end. I can attach that permanently, glue it, nail it, screw it, whatever you're going to do. Put it on there 100%, fix it, right? Fix it. Cut the other miter here, get it tied up against the case, bring it in, and then cut that third leg, making sure this miter is right, and then I can attach that second piece, making sure that I'm sizing my miter. Didn't we talk about sizing here in one of these some weeks back? Sizing my miters and then gluing it on, clamping it, screwing it, nailing it, whatever you're doing. Take this piece off, fit this one, make sure they're both slightly long, fit the miter on this back corner, bring it over. Now this is projecting slightly past, this one's right where it needs to be, and now I can start adjusting these two pieces here at this miter, creeping up on it until I get a nice perfect fit. If I don't want to do it, if I get real close and I'm kind of hesitant to go back to the saw, either the table saw or the miter saw, the best thing, pardon me, excuse me just a second there. Hey, how did my big camera widen up that much? Because now we're seeing stuff that we didn't see before. There we go. Okay. So the idea is you're going to creep up on this corner. That final corner is going to be the one that is the one where we take up all the slop and pull things together to make the final fit. If you get down to the point where you're trying to fit it and you think, oh, if I go back to the saw, it's going to take too much material off. At that point, I'm going to set up a shooting board and hit it with a hand plane. Again, I can do the exact same methodology. If I need to take a little off the toe or a little off the heel, I'm going to stick my wedge in there and modify the miter to match. At some point, we'll do a little thing on shooting boards here, and we can talk about all of that stuff. But most of the time, unless you're dealing with really tiny boxes that you're wrapping moldings on, I'm going to go back either to the table saw or the miter saw to do the fitting on this stuff. And I'm going to try and get it to the point where it's coming off the saw and it's done. Not that using a shooting board is going to give you a roadblock or anything to getting to your end. It's just, I just found it so much quicker and easier to fine tune everything on the power equipment for my miters. So If by some chance you are fitting one of these two and the piece ends up a little too short and you end up with a perfectly uniform gap between the two pieces on your last pass, you can make these pieces slightly longer, either with a hand plane or going to the jointer and taking a pass or two off that inside surface, the one that goes up against the box. Make them very shallow. Hand planes are best because you can adjust that thing half a thou or a thou at a time, depending on how tightly you have your hand plane done. But I could take a swipe or two with a hand plane, put it back in and keep doing it, creep up on it. I could also take, since I have this side and the bottom side here already permanently attached, I could also do that here and creep up on the midpoint of that miter. If this piece, the heels are lining up perfectly with the corner of my box, don't take off both sides. Just take that one end to try and pull it in the short end. All right, let's see what kind of comments and questions I sort of blew past here. All right. Oh, Doug Smith's here. Awesome. And I saw Mike's comment about, working without a net. And I work so hard on my shooting board, Vincent. Yes, definitely. Okay, so that was where I picked this up, because Troy said something about doing the second side, and I tried to get all four in there. Yeah, Vincent, don't throw that shooting board away. It's a great tool to be able to fine tune some things. Once again, the more tools you have, the more problems you can solve. This wrapping a box has an awful lot of problems involved with it. Michael says, I assume this technique works for table saw miter sleds. We covered that. Larry G says, so if you have a gap, don't try to cut both pieces, just one board, right? And the answer is yes. And I saw somebody said something about, why don't I use the Capex thing that divides the miter? Well, that's where we started this when I showed you how to bisect that angle. You can do that. If I'm putting this together, and I'm going to try and get this on camera, so I will switch back to my close-up. No, wrong camera. Right camera. All right, so for some reason I put this together and I'm tight against my case. We're imagining here, folks. Don't comment that it's not tight against the case, because I know it's not tight against the case. I'm trying to illustrate a point here. So if I've got a huge gap there, and right now, I mean, out at the toe of this miter, it's about 3/32. If that's the case, then I'm going to turn around and try and bisect this, because that's an awful lot of material. If I do it the same way, where I just shim the one side, if I cut this at 45 and then I shim this side to take off the heel till I get in there, what's going to happen is this miter is going to end up looking like that, or like that, whichever one shows up best on camera. Where I've got, what I've done is I've changed the width of it, because I'm changing this angle so much that the length of the face of the miter is significantly smaller than the opposite side. The closer I get to 90 on this piece, on either piece, the shorter this surface gets, right? So if that's the case, and I end up with 1/4 of an inch of this board sticking out past this point here, it's going to be noticeable when you walk by the box that it's not even close to being perfectly divided. And the idea here is, if it's a small gap, which is what Honestly, that's most of the time that I've seen in classes that I've taught and things like that. It's tiny gaps that you guys have. You have just a little bit of the toe open or just a tiny little bit of the heel open. And this method works really well for fine tuning that. Why don't I bisect them? It's a lot of work. And like I said before, most saws have the detent at 45. So if you need 44 and a half and 46 and a half, you're going to have a hard time setting the miter gauge to that. On a table saw, it's a little easier with a miter gauge, unless you're using the detents to set it at 45. But if you're not, then, like I said, to me, it's a quick and easy way to do it. Bisecting it and then fiddling with the saw for every single corner on a box to make sure you're dead perfect, it takes up a lot of time. So it's really pretty easy. And like I said, at some point, because we were already an hour here, I'll do another one with some live molding, and I'll show you how I modify that to flow everything in. And the reality is, if we look at period pieces where it was all done by hand, I guarantee you they were done the same way. In fact, I know they were, because I've spent enough time with Matt Bickford to know that he'll go back in with his hollows or rounds and basically flow the corners in. So we'll do that. Maybe I'll postpone what I had for next week, and I will try and set that up where I have a disparate. I won't go through all of this nonsense again, but I'll use my box wrap. I'll have a piece of molding ready to go, and I'll show you how I flow those in. So let's see what else we have here. Cryptic Woodworker. Oh, this is Stephen Kirk. Oh, hey, been a long time. Awesome. All right. John says he made a live edge dining table for best friend's son's family with Mike Pekovich. I'm sorry. And modified upper naga joints. Fun piece. Okay. Jersey walnut. Okay. None of that. Yeah. Okay. Lots of burns on my miters. Those are not burns. I am using Infinities. I'm trying to get the right. Yeah, and I chose the wrong camera again. There we go. All right. Those are not burns. If you look, I've got pitch pockets running through this white pine, and that's what's happening here. It's cross-cutting through the pitch pocket, and it's not actually burning. This is going from one pitch pocket out, and this whole corner comes off of these pitch pockets right here. It's the wood more so than anything. I get it. They do look like burns, but that Infinity blade is super nice for the miter saw. It's not leaving burn marks behind. That thing is leaving actually pretty much a glass smooth finish on there. And you can see, if you're looking at that, you can see this sort of follows. If it was a burn mark, it would be a burn in an arc, the same radius as my saw. But this kind of follows some weird grain pattern in the wood. I mean, you can see on that one where it follows the annual growth ring around. Greg, complimentary, right? No, wait. Supplementary, yes, complimentary 90, supplementary 180. Yes, I knew that from when I did the joiner thing. We were, supplementary angles for the 180. John was the one who asked, why don't I use the equal angles like the Capex figure? Once again, you can. Let me switch cameras because you guys don't need to stare at that nonsense anymore. I know the middle camera on my program there is that one right there. I can't figure out whether the top one is the camera that's looking at this or the one that's looking at the saw, but hey, once again, woodworker, hobbyist, video person, so this is what you get. It's free. It's worth every penny you paid. Douglas wants to know, do you usually leave that 64th on your lengths till you have them all cut? Yeah, so really I was only leaving the 64th of an inch pretty much on those final, that final miter, and I left it on both halves so that I could creep up on it. I'm trying to get the miters absolutely perfectly fit on the 3 loose sides. So when I started this, I started with a long side, and then I went to the short side, and then I went back up the other long side. Now, you could do it short side, long side, short side if you want. That's if I'm wrapping a box fully, that's what I tend to do. If I'm wrapping crown molding around a case, say I made a highboy or a chest of drawers or something that needs a crown on it, you're not putting crown across the back, so it becomes far easier. I fit the front piece first, right? Cut my 45s on there, make them perfectly flush at the heel right up against my case, and then I just fit the sides in to it so that the miters come up perfect. Miter perfect. Profile of the molding does not need to be perfect, and we'll talk about that next week. So yes, I leave. It's the wrong camera. Yeah, switch, change camera. Yeah, that's. We're on the socket. Yeah, I got you. Right. Any difference with moving the wedge closer to the blade versus thicker wedge further back? No. I have always stuck with a single thickness wedge. So I'll take a piece of sandpaper and fold it in half. Sometimes I will fold that in half, but usually I don't. Normally I move the wedge either closer to or farther away. If I start to get to the point where I need to, I've moved it in as far as I'm comfortable holding, because if my pressure is between, so my wedge goes here and I'm pressing here, my saw blade is there. If I get in too tight and I'm really pitching it over and I don't have a whole lot of room between my wedge and the saw blade, at least not enough that I'm comfortable holding, at that point I'm going to double my wedge and move it out and try it again. The good thing is, since we're just butting up against the plate, I'll switch cameras. Yeah, I did it again. Wrong camera. All right. So since all I'm doing is butting up against that plate, I've put the miter together, right? So I know whether I have a toe gap or a heel gap. And if I paid attention, I know if my gap is about that much. Can you guys see that? Let's turn that in and raise the camera. So you should be able to just see a tiny little bit of a gap back at that heel. Left my pencil on the bench. I can try and make sure that I've got about the same amount of gap that I had on my saw. Wait, widen up, widen up, widen up. Not too far, but widen up enough. And now I can take my wedge and slide it in until it's stuck. And now I can drop back that back down, and now I can make fine adjustments to get the gap proper again and then make the cut. Okay? Again, just trying to show you guys that what I'm doing is, no, that's not how I change cameras. It's just how it's getting late for me, 5:30 this morning. What I'm doing is I'm using the saw and the wedge to fine tune these things the way that I would with a shooting board. You know, I can kick that thing slightly and adjust it half a thou at a time, and I can do the same thing on the saw. I just have to go at it thoughtfully and carefully. I can't just, you know, jump in and start cutting things, because then you end up having to make new moldings. All right, so let's see what else. Get that man some blue tape stat. You guys are funny tonight. High glue over PVA? Yes, definitely. What do you think Glenn would have said about this method? I know I'm way behind you guys on the. The funny thing was, when we started doing 360 woodworking and we went out on the tour with the woodworking shows to promote it, I wanted to do something about miters at the shows. So we made up a little cabinet and we took it to the shows. And one of the things that we did was show how to wrap the moldings around it. And we talked about it and practiced it before we went out on the road. And I'm like, here's how I do it. And he looked at me, he's like, seriously? He said, because I've been doing it that way for like 10 years. And it's like, yeah, this is, so we shared the same method, even though we had no clue the other one did it that way. Let's see what else we got there. When you say bisecting the angle, is that the same as kerfing it? No, kerfing, if you guys go to the non-live section of the YouTube channel, you'll see where I did the mitered box joint that runs around my woodpecker's board there, tool board. And that was where we pulled the miter together and ran the saw down between the two pieces. Again, that's something that I can show you next week. That's actually an old carpenter's trick, from wrapping molding around doors, you know, trim around windows and doors. You put it on, make the header piece slightly long, nail everything into place, but you're going to nail that header in a foot off the end, pull it down tight, nail it, and then run the saw right through the miter, and it'll snap right in and be perfect, whether it's 45 or not. It comes up absolutely perfect. So where bisecting is just easiest. Thanks, Jeff. Nice tips. Thank you. When all else fails, just subcontract Chuck to do the molding. Yes, Bob, that's a perfect great show, Chuck. I really enjoyed this, learned a lot. What does the blade cost versus a Woodworker 2? I think it's a little less than a Woodworker 2, but Infinity Tools, they actually list it. If you just type in their search on infinitytools.com, miter saw, it'll come up with the blade. It's honestly, it's one of the best miter saw blades I've ever had on my saw. It doesn't grab, it doesn't pinch. It's just, it leaves it behind an absolutely glass smooth finish. I'd say it ranks right up there with on my hammer slider. I got a Felder. It's like 100 or 120 tooth crosscut blade, and that thing, I mean, you slice across a miter like that and it's shiny like glass. It's that smooth coming off of there. I would say this Infinity blade is just barely behind it. It's a pretty nice blade. Well, thanks, Larry. You're the best too, my friend. Rosemary. Oh, hey, Bob. I know you're not Rosemary. You are Bob, not Rosemary. Does what I've taught tonight regarding the moldings of miters also apply to mitered boxes? And the answer is yes. It's the same thing. They're all miters. You can work your way around the box and do it the same way. The big thing is you want to, I mean, at most you're going to be a 64th to a 32nd out of dimension on your box by doing it that way. Once again, okay, how do you deal with casing on windows or door jambs? I think I already said that, didn't I? I try not to do a whole lot of that stuff. I build furniture. Oh, did Glenn use high glue? I think I had a little bit of an influence on him. I mean, I had high glue going in the shop fairly often when we did 360 woodworking, and I think he started to see the light, although I could never convince him that Shinto thing was just all wrong for woodworking. That's a whole different thing. Yeah, Vincent, caulk and paint. No, putty and paint will make it what it ain't. Hey, Patrick's here. Awesome. So, hey, look, what about running a piece of sandpaper between the corner? I tend not to like the idea of sanding any kind of a joint that gets glued together. When I cut it or I hand plane it, I know I'm coming away flat. When I abrade it with sandpaper, there's no guarantees. So personally, I mean, you do you, but for me, not an option. I know some people that like to do that, and that's fine. Some people like those abrasive. They're like metal. They look like emery boards, but they're not. They're big metal things. They're just covered in abrasive, so you can do that. But again, the more I'm freehanding stuff or working with, I mean, sandpaper isn't flat. It's got abrasive. The surface, by definition, is rough and varying in size. So the idea of running that across a miter that I want to mate up perfectly from one side to the other just never made sense to me. I never understood people that would take this edge right off a table saw, even with a glue line rip. I have one of those, by the way. But those who have been here and taken classes with me know that I still rip everything coming off the table saw about a 32nd wide. I set my joiner up. Usually it's about a 32nd of an inch deep. So we rip a board, we rip it about a 32nd of an inch over, one pass on the sawn edge to get rid of the saw marks, because a milled surface, either hand planed or coming off the joiner, it has to be technically smoother and flatter than something coming off the table saw or running on a sander or something like that. All right. Thanks, Dave. We had when we did the 360 woodworking podcast, 360 with 360, it was just the most fun. And I think I told this story recently. There was a couple that came to the show in Massachusetts. They lived in central or northern Maine, and it was I don't know, 6 or 7 hours or 8 hours or something like that for them to drive to the show. The husband wanted to meet us, and he had all the podcasts downloaded, and he played them the entire ride down. And he's like, it was awesome. I listened to every episode on the ride down. And his wife looked at me and said, every single episode? I said, dude, it is going to be a long ride home. So yeah, Patrick says hand plane for him. Awesome. Yep. Really enjoyed the time tonight. We've gone extra long. Like I said, next week I'm going to postpone what I had planned for one more week. So next week we're going to talk about flowing in corners and making things a little longer. I'll show you. We'll do some molded stuff onto my box here. I'll treat it like a crown molding. Show you what happens when the profiles don't line up perfectly, and we'll make some adjustments there. Not so much about the miters, but about the moldings themselves. So until next week, if you like this video, if you're not watching it live, if you are, you can still like it. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and ring that little bell so you get the notifications, because you don't want to miss any of this. Thanks for sticking around this long, and I will see all of you next week, hopefully with a whole lot better news than where we started out. So good night, everyone. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate you guys being here. Great questions, by the way. Thanks.